everyone. Welcome to another HRO Today podcast. I'm Marta Chmielewicz, Associate Editor of HRO Today, and I'm here with Amy Cappellanti-Wolf, the former Senior Vice President and CHRO of Symantec. Amy recently left the organization following its acquisition by Broadcom, but in her 5.5 years as CHRO, she completely transformed the HR team's approach to people data and analytics into a strategic business function. Here, Amy shares some best practices that you can bring back to your organizations. Can you share one of the greatest business successes that emerged as a result of your people analytics strategy?
Well, I would say probably one of the successes was the example that I shared related to how do you think about sales leaders and sales employees and their retention, and how do you make certain you're keeping the right folks who have real performance. So I'd say that was a real business case. I'd say the second one was we had a large-scale project after we divested a significant business from our company. We had a lot of stranded costs that we had to get rid of. And so we said we had to cut a fair amount of operating expense out of the business. And so what has been happening in the past at some companies is just do a 10% cut across the board. That's the easiest thing, but it's clearly not the right thing, because you may be cutting things that are critical to the business and you're not thinking about the downstream impacts of just cutting people versus thinking about process in a more data-driven approach. So I was on the hook to help manage this $130 million cost takeout, and everything from real estate consolidation to organizations to people to infrastructure. And so we took a very data-driven approach and looked at workforce planning and where do we think we have opportunities to consolidate towards centers of excellence in terms of our sites. Where do we think we can find the best talent in terms of high cost, medium cost, and low cost? So we realized that we were in a very competitive labor market, paying very high salaries where we could get equally capable talent in lower cost locations that we already had a presence in. So we used data to help look at what those costs were and how could we move those costs more effectively into lower cost locations. We looked at very traditional things like spans and layers, but instead of just looking at spans based off of what the company strategy was in terms of the number of people managers having a number of direct reports and a number of layers, we did benchmarking to see what makes sense for a function such as HR and how they're structured versus a function in engineering and how they're structured. So we started to report on these things that in the past were hard to gain and help them make good business decisions. So we leveraged the data to help us with workforce planning and making good decisions around where you have pivotal roles. We used it to help look at organizational structures. We used it to help us make decisions around how you think about layers and decision making and how you take those out. And as a result, we took that cost out within 18 months, which is practically unheard of, and HR was a key and critical part of helping drive that.
And what are some best practices that you would recommend for companies that want to better leverage people data to improve their HR strategy?
Well, the best practice, which is, as I mentioned, is all about really what are you solving for? What is this data going to help inform you to perform better in? How's it going to help you drive the business more effectively? Data for data's sake, I think, is a waste of time. So if you're pooling data, you need to make certain you can put intelligence over it, so that's really going to have something that's going to change the weather versus just report the weather. That'd be one thing. Two, get very clear about your constituents that you work with to pool the data within other functions, whether that's working with IT, with finance, if there's a business intelligence centralized function in the company. How do you work together to make certain that you're pooling single sources of truth? The moment that the data is questionable, it loses its credibility immediately. So get really clear about your data sources and make certain they're aligned and they're consistent. And the third thing would be, as you pull this data, which then creates predictive analytics, make certain your business knows how to use this. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people do these magnificent reports that are really informative and could really change the game, but they don't see the light of day because either the business doesn't know how to use them, they aren't interested, or your business partners don't know how to consult and advise against those types of reports or data insights. So you have to have the skills and capability to grok it and consume it and then apply it.
And how can HR leaders make sure that all the different business leaders know how to leverage this data?
Well, I think first of all, you have to have strong HR business partners who like data and understand it and want to use it as a decision-making tool. And then I'm a strong believer you play with those, you meet people where they're at, and you play with those who really want to understand this data, and you use them as a positive peer pressure to get other business leaders to use it, because you can take use cases that as a result of this leader using this data, they were able to really affect change. And if I can just give you a quick example, our CISO, which is our Chief Information Security Officer, had a largely male organization, and he was retooling the organization. And these are people who run network operating centers. They are analysts that look at irregularities in our network, and they help our customers make certain that they protect them from breaches. But this is largely an internal group, making certain that we're secure as a company in our data. And so he made it a focus based off of the numbers he had, and he looked at what are key roles that I could, based off of the available population, go after to help bring more diversity to my organization. So we married our market data with what we knew was market available in the locations he wanted to hire, and we leveraged those particular roles in our TA team to go after and find that kind of talent. And then he worked with his team to make certain that they had the right kind of diverse talent slates and the right diverse talent teams to interview, and he improved his diversity reputation by 60% in 6 months as a result of taking a very data-driven approach. That's a huge win, and we used him as a poster child and a use case to say, if you take the time to understand your workforce composition and where your gaps, you can truly change the game if you use this data and work with HR to help solve your gaps.